Hello and welcome back, or welcome to maybe new participants, digitally and in person, to our last point on the program, namely a more open discussion about the use of digital tools for cultural heritage, in particular of forced migration. And in particular, I want to be having a very frank and open conversation about the challenges, because we in the morning have been able to articulate all the merits, and I think they're numerous, and I'm very happy that Dominika ended on this very systematic overview, her points on how the digital tools can be used in combination with various other activities. But I would like, in a sense, to wrap up thinking through, hopefully with a benefit of the future users in mind, thinking about the challenges met along the way. And just in full disclosure, I have already prepared some of the questions beforehand, so I'm hoping I'm not going to take anyone by surprise. But maybe I'm going to start with the academic in the panel, like I mean, we're all academics to some extent, but Eleonora is the digital cultural heritage or cultural heritage more broadly expert. So I'm basically curious to hear your thoughts about what does the academic literature on cultural heritage, on the digitalization of cultural heritage, and the theories around maybe migrants and refugees' cultural heritage. What do those literatures teach people who will be, let's say, practitioners, future users of the tools, about creating such narratives that are accurate and correct, so to say, from a scientific point of view, but also emotionally powerful?
Do you want to have a very short answer or a very long one?
Let's begin with a short one, and then we can elaborate.
Yes, the very short answer in a nutshell is that, of course, we have absolute array of suggestions in the field about how things should be done, how they can be done, how they could be done, and how people do things in their own way. So we have, of course, plenty of, more theoretical suggestions and more practical, like descriptions how to do, more like hands-on approaches. So we have basically quite a lot to deal with. But the issue is always to customize, really. When you know that you should apply your knowledge, which is very kind of very fluffy, broad and flexible and extensive, to some concrete cases. And you work with very special cultural institutions. And you have, as audience, you have got a glimpse of how different these cultural institutions are. So of course you need to figure out what has to be put aside immediately because it does not suit at all. And then from the rest, it's nice to figure out what can be customized somehow, how the small details can be adjusted to someone's ways of work, or someone's strategies of doing their work. And somehow it seems to me that the most useful experience, kind of the most useful lesson from academic literature is customize, kind of open the field for very different perspectives, solutions, first and foremost from experts themselves. Because we know that experts, it's enormous. Expertise is enormous field in cultural heritage. We have critical cultural heritage. We have more practical cultural heritage. We have heritage management. So somehow we have so much on our table, and for the purpose of this project, we had to figure out what fits, and somehow what we tried to do, we summarized quite a lot in this report. We wrote and rewrote it several times.
It was a very good report.
Yeah, it was a very good report, but we had to adjust it all the time. at the end of the day, I think what we managed to formulate very nice is the point about the obstacles to figuring out heritage of forced migrations, like have obstacles. Why it's difficult to work with cultural heritage exactly in this field, and one of the most obvious obstacles is of course the nature of the experiences, because forced migrations is the field that is still in the process of formulation, so to speak. The heritage of forced migrations, if you go into research literature, is something that you do not see immediately that even this formulation exists. You see migrating heritage. Sometimes you can see migrant heritage. Sometimes you see heritage of migrations, but heritage of forced migrations, it's a kind of very precise conceptualization, and we had to figure out really how to deal with it and what obstacles we can meet in this field. So one of the obvious obstacles is, of course, conceptual. What is the concept of this heritage of forced migration? What do we mean by that? From our work, as it has been presented, it seems to me that we already know, kind of partially, we know the answer. The heritage of forced migrations is not only kind of archive that already exists about the events, about these expulsions, about forced displacement, genocide, and stuff like that Europeans experienced once upon a time. It's also something that is being developed because people with similar experience, typologically similar experience, come to Europe, and they also have to be a part of the society with their narratives, with their historical experiences, with their stories and their destinies. So somehow we should open the field for them as well. How? The next obstacle. How we can do this? We do not have recipes. We do not have some ready strategies ready to catch. So the next obstacle, the third obstacle, of course, is political issues. Like it's not the most easy.
Exactly. I was actually going to maybe press you a little bit further on this political aspect, because it's been touched a little bit about that indirectly, but I think it's interesting to see if there's any, from a more scientific and general point of view, not necessarily specifically to any location, some combination of the politics of it, like what is necessarily problematic. Magda was talking already about that talking about this, just talking about it, bringing in, putting it on the agenda is associated perhaps with a certain ideology, in her case, left-wing ideology as opposed to conservative ideology. We know also in Sweden we had a politicized discussion around a museum in Malmö, Rörelsernas Museum, the Museum of Movements, I guess. That was a planned project which eventually did not come through, and I'm not familiar with the intricacies of that decision, but all I know is that it was a political decision. And maybe even in Poland, again, I'm looking at both Kasia and Dominika, talking about or allowing Ukrainian refugee voices to take place in the public sphere is acceptable, whereas other voices that you already have recorded, though, in your stories, like the Afghans and the Libyans and so on, were maybe not as politically appealing or encouraged, from what I gather from the Polish official discourse. So, Eleonora, when you think about the politics of it, and again, maybe future users will also have to grapple with a certain political environment, what does the literature say? Like, how do we engage and provide a counterbalance to the political, or do we kind of try to navigate what is allowed to us by the politicized, perhaps, question of migration, forced migration?
Okay, I start to thinking very intensely on this question, and I see two sides in this issue of politicization. One side is that the concept of heritage is already stamped in research literature, at least in that literature that is around 12 years old, is that heritage is already kind of conservative. It's stamped as a conservative concept. So people who talk about heritage, they are conservative, usually. And somehow, even in Sweden, it's not a big secret that Sweden Democrats, they positioned themselves quite early and quite strategically as those who take care of this discourse of heritage, because they stamped the field as like, we talk about cultural heritage in Sweden. We talk about bridges, churches, cemeteries, about like this traditional type of cultural heritage that connects, of course, to the idea of national community. It's our Swedish heritage. We will develop it. We will not allow it to disappear. We will not allow it to be dismantled, so to speak. So this is kind of one side. So somehow already, it's when we hear the word heritage, it's already kind of so certain sorts of actors will talk about it and will have voice in this discussion. But on the other hand, when we're thinking more broad terms, heritage as a concept, as a practical and research concept, it's a very democratic thing. Things, heritage, because heritage, unlike inheritance, heritage is always public, yes? And in order to figure out where is heritage, where is your heritage, what strikes the chord, of course, it's the decision that is not taken by one person. No one can decide this will be heritage. You know, in our field, we have seen so many times that absolutely banal, stupid, or on the contrary, kind of very exotic things, they become heritage. Why? No one knows. Why this something strikes the chord? You know when it is heritage, when people start to defend it. Because when it's just something exists, like that building. If it exists, you kind of okay. You don't think about this as culture. If someone comes and says like, we'll tear down this building, why? Kind of, it's in my face. It's it's not allowed. So people somehow have this idea. Yes, we as public actors, we have to deal with such issues. So kind of heritage, on the other hand, this has been said, it's democratic. It strikes the chord. It strikes. It connects to emotions of many people, not just special actors. So that's why it's always very, very difficult to find a balance in kind of how one deals with heritage. It's all the time balance of between actors, between voices, between academic concepts, between political circumstances, kind of streams. So all the time it's about communication, it's about choice, it's about empowerment, disempowerment, and that's why it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think you've made a great argument, and we feel much better for being in the middle of such an interesting debate. Do you want to comment directly on this political aspect, Dominika or Kasia? Feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we can also move on to the next question if you don't care to comment, as you wish.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, I agree with the fact that heritage is a collective social construct. That comes from the grassroots level, but it's being managed by the political actors. And in a sense, it should be considered and discussed as one of the quite important policy goals or elements. But at the same time, we should at least try to avoid a situation when this topic or the artifacts or the stories are being monopolized by one side of the political debate, especially that it's not only the case of Poland or not a case of Hungary. We see the growing polarization. So it's very highly likely that having the topic of heritage, both material, tangible and intangible one, we can end up taking sides in the political debate or conflict that not necessarily ends up positively, like
Yeah.
in a constructive way.
So maybe this is something that future users also need to locate themselves and navigate these politicized and, as you say, perhaps even beginning to be polarized situations. So it's not a neutral situation, especially if we bring history and present together. Because I think even to some extent, in my view, not as a historian, even though, of course, I can understand some of these historical concepts, I think some of the historical heritage, like the memory of internal wars and so on, have had the time to be processed, maybe also the time to be more politicized. But since migration itself is a disputed concept and a politicized concept, then if we deal both with heritage, which is politicized, and with migration, which is politicized in another way, then we can have kind of a powerhouse of explosions or not. And I think in the project we've been rather successful in trying to find this navigating route, but it's something that other contexts need to be aware. For sure. So this is why I was curious about your experience, Kasia, working with this, because you yourself are a forced migrant because of political reasons, right? So your entire present situation is to some extent originated in a politicized and political action. So how do you see this type of, how did you relate to the task of talking about the heritage of migration when you yourself came from a political migration background in this particular situation?
Well, I can say that I can relate.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I wanted to emphasize that getting back to the previous question, it took real courage from Dominika and from Willa Decjusza, Institution of Culture, to also adjust voices of, for example, Afghani refugees and Belarusian refugees this year, when 1 year before it was a conflict, like a political conflict taking place in Poland with Afghani refugees, and it was very tricky question if we are speaking out and inside of Poland, letting them tell their stories when the society had issues with it. And also with Belarusians, the year when war started and Belarus was just connected to Russia in this conflict politically, and the question of being forced migrant is still here, but it's getting invisible, and it's very hard to pronounce that you are Belarusian, for example, inside of Poland or inside of Germany. Like a couple of days ago, there took place a conference for 14 countries inside, previously announced, and only 12 of them took real place, and they were not mentioned in Russia and Belarus, cancelled as participants. But when one of my friends, who is a Belarusian refugee, politically active, asked why her country was cancelled when actually most of the society was against the regime, German side just told that they are not anymore in diplomacy relations with Belarus, and they are just ignoring the problem that mostly refugees, they are forced migrants because of the reason that they are not accepting the political way, right? And it's also a heritage of freedom of speech that was saved by Willa Decjusza in this project. So we're not only talking about the heritage that is in things that is material, but also about the unmaterial heritage and about this bravery to stand for and let yourself telling the truth and letting other people having their opinions about this topic, making the topic visible one more time, and trying to not bring a war, but bring peace by letting these topics appear. So for me it was important that both Ukrainian and Belarusian voices appeared, and we found some kind of understanding each other. Because when we are meeting in real life, we really can relate to each other, we can understand it. And such projects are developing the empathy and sympathy that I was talking about previously.
I wanted to follow up very briefly. Maybe there'll be some questions online, and I'll turn to that in a second. But I wanted to just follow directly on Kasia's comment about this idea that we create peace and harmony. But have you not encountered the situation where the two refugee narratives would be a little bit at odds with one another? Like I had the privilege of attending several of the events within So Close, and I remember that when one of your Ukrainian storytellers emphasized that she is different, like she emphasized that I am a professional, I'm established, I'm older, and she, in my view, appeared to make a difference between herself and the other refugees that were also invited to, which were younger and coming from a different cultural background and so on. So did you experience that as a tension or just as a diversity of points of view? I don't know if either of you want to comment. Just to finalize this political element, and then we'll move on to a different topic.
I mean, it's a very important part of the picture that it's painted by those interested in using the So Close tools. So taking into consideration the political environment. I believe that it is a role and a great obligation and capacity of the non-governmental sector and media and universities to be on board of such initiatives, even in spite of the fact how much, to what extent are they politicized these days. Of course, it was kind of a challenge to engage and to develop this project in Poland, not only for the political reasons and the fact that before the escalation of war in Ukraine, we already have experienced a lot of tension and challenge because of the refugee so-called crisis at the border with Belarus. So the influx of the non-Caucasian, Slavic immigrants, but later on with an influx of Belarusian citizens who were forced to leave Belarus because they actively opposed the Lukashenko regime. It was followed by this tragic developments in Ukraine and the great numbers of people who came in. We were not even trying to find a balance, because I believe that these stories and this situation and the context and the reasons behind this forced migration, it is not something to be compared or contrasted even. What we were trying to do, we were trying to give a voice to those who were eager to share their stories, the way they wanted to present their stories, their experiences. We ended up having a kind of a catalog of situations and cases that tells a lot about how the very homogeneous country like Poland had changed overnight.
Very interesting. I think we also have a comment in the room.
Yeah, we have one comment in the room, and then we also have a comment from the online audience, but for now we're going to the on-site.
Could you say a little bit who you are?
Yes, Henrik Tillemann, artist. I'm wanted to talk about courage. 2002, my art museum took an initiative to make a project before the general election, and it was about power. And we invited museums all over Sweden to examine power and challenge power. And yes, we got a couple of museums that wanted to take part of it, but I also had a lot of discussions with politicians and with people from museums that were scared, thinking of the possibility to challenge power. And I think that in Sweden, cultural institutions are not used to be in collision with power, since we're this kind of slippery liberal country. And now we are becoming, going into a situation where the right-wing parties actually already have been steering libraries and other places and changing their programs. So I would like to have a comment upon the possibilities for institutions to actually be not self-sufficient, but showing this courage to do these kinds of exhibitions and projects.
Yeah, I don't know if one needs to add more, but I think you already commented yourself that you show that some were
What will
interested
happen?
Yeah. What will happen when the political waters shift, so to say? Well, I may comment myself directly, and then, of course, anyone who wants to jump in, is that one of the advantages of doing a European project such as So Close is that the funding for this project is not connected to any particular government, but it comes from a higher instance, so to say. And in that sense, one is more empowered because it's financially independent from any political decision maker, or to some extent at least independent, to be perhaps more relaxed when it comes to taking into account all the cultural diplomatic aspects. But of course, one is never completely outside the social and political context one operates in. So it's a question that maybe some other people want to comment, or maybe we want to summarize it in another way. But I think having this European dimension and using the type of competitive work that we have done in the project enables or gives more courage to go back to your term, or maybe it was Kasia's term, gives more courage to institutions to grapple with issues that are maybe unpalatable politically, and to address some heritages, I don't know if it's correct to say that, but some issues of heritage that are politically problematic.
I
Yes,
also
Kasia.
want to tell that heritage of a nation, for example, or culture of some country is not defined to be in connection with a political heritage. So the same as like Belarusians, they are not Lukashenko ideology, and people coming from Afghanistan, they are not Taliban ideology and culture roots. So when we are saving heritage, it's a big question: what exactly are we saving? And giving the voices to people coming from there, we are getting to know what exactly we are talking about. And of course, it might be problematic when government is not allowing you to speak out or to make some events, and that's exactly what appeared in my country, in Belarus, originally, like canceling the publishers publishing in Belarusian language or events in Belarusian language. So the great opportunity that we had in Poland and that we are still having is very important, and I don't know what will happen if, for example, Poland will also stop, at least if not supporting, but letting Belarusians be there, right? Nevertheless, getting back to your comment about our Ukrainian hero, emphasizing that she is different from others because of knowledge or experience. As I already said before, everyone wants to be different in the similar way. That's important to remember always. And she was saying from her experience, her own truth, but I know this person, and I know also that she is saying not to push herself in front, but to speak from the face of most of refugees that we just have this experience, we have our qualification. The same as Yulia, the Belarusian hero, she is a qualified architect, right? But in Poland, she's working on absolutely not connected with her experience and education work. And that's what also Svetlana was telling us, that not to compare her story with the stories of other refugees, mostly to empathize that we are not coming from the jungle. We are not absolutely uneducated, unable to read and speak people. And we can propose something from ourselves, not only ask to people to help us and support and take on their hands and carry. It's more about you can really invite us and give a chance to bring something new and important in your culture and heritage, because we are able to do it.
Yes, Dominika?
Ad vocem, a short comment. The case of a storyline that we are now discussing, the Ukrainian story of a woman in her 40s with 2 kids that was forced to leave her home and job and property back in Zaporozhye, was an important part of our story map, also because of the reasons Kasia has mentioned. So it's a great illustration of the situation. Then if you would have had a chance, you would have never leave your life and your country and your property and your future. But I also wanted to add one thing, that we all need to be aware of the fact that it's a different thing and different challenge to tackle and to navigate and reinterpret the heritage or the stories from the past compared to the ongoing situation. I mean, including the Ukrainian voices in our project, in our story map, was a necessity. It was out of question. We have to have it. But at the same time, we are aware of the fact that the stories that has been shared, the hopes and fears, the very recent experiences are so intense and so fresh that it differs, these narratives, from the others that had happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah, very important also indeed to underline this time aspect. Maybe now we have a question from the digital realm, and we're ready to hear it. Elena?
Hello. Good afternoon. Yes. Hi.
Hi. Good to see you, even though digitally at this point. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes.
As this will be recorded for eternity, and we want to know exactly who was who.
I'm Elena Monicelli, and I'm the Peace School Foundation of Montesole coordinator. The Peace School was one of the partner of the consortium of So Close. And I would like to share with all of you a short comment that actually comes from probably one of the very first questions of this morning. And these interesting comments you are providing now in the roundtable gave me more opportunity to reinforce this idea, meaning you were talking about the political aspect of both heritage and migration issues. And this morning there was a questions about how you can compare different stories. And I think that this kind of perspective can be easily tackled also in terms of political aspects, because the idea of comparison can be easily, in our opinion, of course, deconstruct when you suggest to stop the victimization and the victim perspective all in all. Meaning that usually memory of the past is used to claim your right to be defined a victim, your right meaning a country or a nation right. This is mainly something connected to the a public level of memory, of course. But again, the point is that when you use the memory of the past is to establish your identity and your level of power. And usually a victim has more right and more power of any other elements in the room. So the idea is always to claim that your tragedy is bigger or more important or decide you the adjective you want to give, but it's more than the other. And when working with asylum seekers and migrants here in Italy, and we were working with them directly on the place of the biggest Nazi massacre of civilians during the Second World War, we were told by them that for them in the first step, it was not a matter of comparison, because the situation were really different, because condition and context are really different. The point is that in both situations, human rights are violated, for example, and they are violated in terms because of some precise premises, like, for example, dictatorship or economic exploitation, or different kind of mechanism that determines those violations. So in order to take away some power to this political discourse, what we learn working in the So Close project is that it can be useful to unbuild, to try to deconstruct the idea of victim per se, elaborating the fact that every human being has rights. So, and with this I will close my comment, but I often listen today to the word hero in reference to these migrants or refugee or asylum seekers. And once one of the person we were working with said to us that he is not a hero. He is just a human being forced to migrate in this respect and willing to gather the fundamental rights he has as a human being. So also in this respect, you risk not to be attacked, for example, from other political parties, if you don't build at the first place the idea of them being something particular. We were discussing also in Brussels the idea of deconstructing the privilege in favor of human rights. So when it comes to the fundamental rights, it's really harder for the political parties, whatever, to exploit this kind of situation from the condition of migrants, from the cultural heritage, from the point of view of museums, and so on and so forth. So I think that this is really something important that So Close can bring to the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. And I think it's definitely something we can easily take on board. And thank you for being with us digitally. So don't go away. And if you have other comments, please feel free to join the conversation. Absolutely. In the interest of time, even though of course we can definitely talk more about the politics of it, but I'm now thinking we could move the discussion, keeping on the challenges. Yeah. So not letting it necessarily go, but focusing more on maybe the part connecting to this digital aspects. We already hinted a little bit at Dominika's or during Dominika's presentation about the positive and negatives of this, but I'm thinking about you, Eleonora, and the more bird's eye view that you've taken by looking at many examples, not only the ones in So Close, but some of which you currently work with or previously worked with. How important is this idea of digitalization? I think Dominika ended saying like, we must preserve to some extent, because look at what happens in unexpected crises. Nobody expected some archives or some museums or some works of art to completely disappear, but it has happened in Ukraine, it happened in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and so many other places. Like, is the digital, is digital cultural heritage, how can I say, just as important? Like, or is it something that is just trending? Like, is it something that the European Union wants us to deal with because they think it's very useful and important, but it's kind of an added layer? Again, I'm very provocative in this panel just because, these are some questions that perhaps everybody wants to talk about, but nobody dares. So here we do it.
It's a question about courage again. Coming to the issue of courage, because talking also about this, like whether this task of digitalizing heritage of forced migration is something imposed on us, or we chose it somehow unwillingly or not. Opinions may differ, of course, but the issue for at least from my perspective, is not whether digitalization or not, but how. Because talking about heritage and talking about again the idea of what heritage does and what for whom is heritage. So somehow we come to the issue that, again, connecting the question of human rights, cultural institutions, and the whole discourses of politics. Heritage is within the sphere of human rights. Of course, we cannot discuss nowadays the issues of heritage and heritagization without talking about human rights. But heritage is not about human rights. So somehow heritage and heritage institutions have their autonomous tasks and autonomous purposes even. So somehow, of course, heritage should be somehow protected and should be also included into this conversation about like how we can preserve, how we can select, how we can empower someone, and how human rights come into the picture. But heritage institutions have their own absolutely specific task, as we all know. First and foremost, Dominika, you as practitioner and you as a director of potent cultural heritage institution, you know, of course, that the task first and foremost is to educate, is to disseminate, is to preserve, is to kind of open for public something very important about the past. So somehow the issue is not to kind of adjust your task to some kind of orders from from above. The issue is to, of course, to find your own voice and somehow to tackle the field in a way that kind of finds response in broader public, and also somehow, of course, politicians, well, whether they agree or not, but they should allow you to be autonomous. Yeah, so somehow heritage institutions have this, well, autonomous issue. Okay, so they have to be courageous to insist on this well, autonomous existence of their perspective somehow. And this leads us to the idea, okay, but digitalization. Digitalization, of course, is not something again that exists in a bubble. It's something that is, of course, is facilitating. It's something that creates opportunities. It's something that structures, helps you to structure, helps you to figure out something interesting. But without, again, curatorial practices, without autonomous ideas, so to speak, about special ideas, curatorial ideas, digitalization will not solve your problems. So somehow, if you do not have already some interesting projects or some interesting perspectives, like how, for whom I will use the digital tools, it will not work. So somehow it will be just technical exercise in something, in kind of constructing pretty tools, so to speak, without something essential. So the issue, again, kind of brainstorming what cultural institution wanted to have from these digital tools, how they adjusted these digital tools for their specific tasks. And they did it, in fact, in very interesting ways in our project. And well, talking about not only our institutions within the project, but other interesting examples in the world. So I would like to mention the example of recently opened, very new museum that is called Documentation Center for Expulsions and Forced Migrations in Berlin. And I was really impressed by their well, ambition of using this interactivity, or kind of introducing this very kind of intellectual view of how digital tools can work in their milieu, because they didn't just took something like, press on this button and something will appear, everyone will have fun, kind of something will be well, more spectacular. No, they placed their digital tools, so they're kind of projections of screens, interesting details projected via these digital tools in a strategic joint of the exhibition. Somehow, for them, the digital tools underlined, kind of emphasized some important points with help of visual solutions, with help of some kind of like movable, animated stuff. So somehow it was extremely interesting, really, to observe how these curatorial ideas were kind of so creative that this exhibition, although it is huge, it was not boring, because digitality, this digital solution, worked as they should. So somehow I think in the case of our institutions, it's also the idea, like how they customize, how they make these digital tools work. So
excellent. Dominika, I think it's a direct comment almost required at this point, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to mention two more aspects, I think quite important, if not crucial, to incorporating the digital tools into managing everyday management of the cultural institutions or historic sites. One is accessibility. The second one is security. Mm-hmm. As for accessibility, I agree with Eleonora, and I already mentioned it before in my presentation, that you need a substance, you need a content, you need a network, pre-existing know-how to be able to fully exploit and make good use out of new technologies, especially when it comes to the material world, a world of material heritage. But on the other hand, we need to look forward, and the future is the Z and Alpha generation that were born to be, as it's being said, digital. And therefore, the smart use of the digital environment, it's substantial in order to drag attention and to keep the flow, the transfer of the what's important within the wide range of heritage to the generation that is almost ready to have it, to keep it. As to the security, it has not been mentioned, but I think it's also important that, of course, we can see that digitalization, especially of the material object, as a kind of an answer to the threat, especially the physical threat, to its integrity. But on the other hand, this is the discussion that needs to be started soon, if not now, about the security of the digitalized databases. As we have seen in the past months, the hybrid conflicts are even more efficient, even more strategically dangerous to the virtual assets. And saying that, I am aware that us have a lot to do, not only in order to digitalize, but also to make sure that this kind of databases are also safe.
Yeah, very interesting. A layer, digital is a security to the physical, but the digital itself can be under threat from this hybrid war or hybrid approaches. Definitely. Also interesting for organizations that already have a lot of digital assets, because our tools can be used for our organizations that want to use them to as an incentive or through the memory center platform as an addition to whatever they have in physical form or in recorded through other means, like on camera or old school media. But it's also useful for organizations that already have a heavy digital load, but maybe they don't necessarily maximize the use of that digitality, and that these tools could be an incentive and a facilitation of their use of all the records that they have, maybe in this kind of documentation centrum spirit. Yes, I get that there is a comment from the digital realm. So talking about digital, it's a perfect input. Lily?
It's not necessarily a comment about this, but we have two questions on the Miro board that I thought would be good to bring up. Also, while we have Elena Monicelli still online with us, because I think she can also bring in her input. One question is about, so we've heard some example now from Villa Decjusza, which is a very important physical space in itself. What about institutions that don't necessarily have that type of space, but still want to create stories within the tools? How could they approach this, like using the tools?
Well, we already have an example from the Greek Refugee Forum, so maybe Magda can pick up on that, and then maybe Elena, who has a different type of physicality, can also chip in if Elena is ready to intervene via Zoom. But I think Magda can tell us more about this situation of the unphysically connected situation. Please, Magda.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the case of the Greek Forum of Refugees is unique because it's not a cultural institution without a physical space. It's an NGO created by refugees for refugees. But I think that it's a good example of how an institution that it's not a cultural institution but has to do with refugees, how can use this kind of digital tools. So Greek Forum has cooperated with an archival institution in Athens called ASCII. So all of the content in the tools that has to do with the past narratives are maintained through ASCII, so it will be there. So one thing is to collaborate with other relevant institutions. So one solution would be this one. And the other solution is that since it is a network, more than a network, with refugees and with different communities, these communities can work and actually are working inside In its community, there are refugees who are trying to create their projects, but for very, very different occasions. For example, I know that the Kurdish refugees are making like recite stories from Kurdish traditional cuisine, and are trying to connect them with the Greek recipes that I know by first hand. There are very similar ones. Yeah. So they're trying to do like combining different ingredients and make like Kurdish Greek plates.
Fusion cooking.
Yeah, exactly. So, but this is a very unique case because it's going downwards to the communities, and then every community can create projects that has not to do exactly with showing the experiences of forced displacement, but sharing culture.
Yeah.
In a way.
Excellent.
Wanted to comment this exact moment that is a wonderful metaphor of forced migration experience. The combination of two different dishes, origins in two countries as a mixture. And that's what is happening with us as refugees. We are coming with our cultural background, and then our cultural background is slowly just connecting and intertwining with the cultural background we are adjusting to. That's the same as recipes are changing with different ingredients. So it is very poetical. And by the way, on the question of digitalization, I just wanted to mention that digitalization and digital arts, they are also arts, and it's a kind of magic for me that with symbols, creating the code, we in the result can see physical, like visual, for example, materials, and we can use digitalization as one of the way how to make our art staying in the world. Like we know that Alexandrian library was burned and destroyed, and how now Ukrainians and people around Ukraine were trying to save art from the Ukraine. So it's not the only way how to save our material art, but it's one of the way we can use. Of course, being aware of the risks that also appears, and the risk that we cannot put all the art in digital world on virtual reality and then stop developing. First of all, the issue is that digital arts are developing all the time. And for example, I'm considering if we can make so close project open for renovation, if some, for example, migrants who are very professional IT specialists want to join us and propose something new when the digital space is changing, and we want to reshape it, make another design or something else, and they are proposing their skills to help us. Why not? Of course, art is changing all the time, developing all the time. And in the same moment, digital space can just disappear because it's not material, so it can easily be corrupted or deleted.
Yep.
And we need to know how to make it more secure, or at least not to forget about our material heritage and also try to save it.
Was there maybe a comment from Elena about this question?
Yes, we have Elena waiting to comment, and then we have a follow-up kind of question from the Miro board.
Yes, Elena.
Thank you. Just an idea, because we were working also on that. I mean, the Peace School is based in the actual place of the 1944 massacre area. So kind of easy link to the past. But what we did also was working a lot within the city of Bologna, for example, because if you consider the street names or the square's name or the district's name, you can easily find the past over there. And so it's a matter of giving a meaning to that past and connecting. Example, we have a district still called in Bologna Cirenaica, and it refers clearly to the colonial past of Italy. And so we use the name of the district itself and some name of streets that are still linked to those crimes and wars that were committed by the Italian colonization, to discuss, for example, about the possible link between past and present. We were not in Libya or Eritrea or Ethiopia, but yet the city is bringing to us some memory of what was then. And you can easily link the present time and the past. And doing this, you can also give different meaning to some street. Again, another example, I don't know, there's one of these street named after the colonialist campaign has a fruit and vegetables market. So for the person we were working with, that street was the street for taking care of the family, because she was going there to shop and to feed her family and her children and so on and so forth. So it's a matter of adding a new layer of meaning to the street. So why now you associate that street to a different idea than the one that is brought to the community by the name of the street, for example. It's an interesting way of building different layers on every city possibly in the world.
Thank you very much. And I think this kind of covers a little bit this the fact that there is no need for a specific emplacement for these tools to work. And I will make just a couple of quick comments before, of course, listening to the question before. Like the digital tools that we created, we already write that in one of our reports. I think we can summarize their use in like three major ways. One is to use them as standalone digital stories, only accessible through a digital interface, such a web page, as Dominika was also mentioning, is the case partly to Villa Decjusza, and I believe it's going to be the case for GFR and pretty much for all our organizations and probably future organizations. You can be a visitor to the website of this particular organization and then browse around and discover this particular interactive tool. That's one way. The other way is to actually go to the other extreme and use this only connected to physical events. For example, for workshops, for teaching moments in schools or in like in the Peace School and so on. Only use it as support for real life events. So activate the content only when physical visitors are present and there's a guided expert to navigate together with the visitors and explain this is that. And this is a little bit what Lucia has done also in Villa Decjusza with her virtual exhibition, that would make little sense for an individual visitor, a browser interface, but it would make a lot of sense if Lucia is there with you and explains, this is what I mean with this is what I mean with that, to a public that can also ask why and how. And then the middle ground is this kind of combination in which the tools are available they are more developed than a simple bare bones variant like the one that I was mentioning before just now, but also not made to be used in completely standalone-ish. But it would be something like, for example, visitors would interact with prior to a physical event. They would gather information and then they would come to an event with that information under their belt, so to say, prepared to discuss what they found either interesting or problematic, something that provokes thoughts or feelings. So that's another way to look at it. So I think our future users can think which one of these three types of usage is more suitable for the type of event or the type of use or the type of material or resources they have. Just to keep in mind, because that question I think could be answered also in this way. But yeah, we have some other comments, and we want to make room for all of them. So Lily, can you tell us more?
Yeah, we have one more question here that is relates a little bit, because now we've talked a lot about like the challenges and benefits of using the tools once they have all the content. What were the challenges or the lessons learned basically from the gathering content process and the putting it all into a narrative process? Can you tell a bit more about who was the person gathering the content? How did you organize it? And
yeah,
maybe also Elena wants to say something again, but we can start with Dominika.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not going to cover the whole field, but let me mention one thing that can be challenging and needed to be kept in mind when starting the whole process, the whole journey. It should be an open access kind of data. More or less, that was the concept behind the project, and I believe that this is something consortium wants to continue. So each and every organization, institution, even individual interested in populating the tools with the content concerning the forced migration topic needs to be aware that it's going to be public. And when we are handling such a delicate matter as an experience, especially of living protagonists who experienced recently such a traumatic situations, I believe that it needs to be very carefully approached and considered.
Yeah.
And
Kasia also worked with that.
As far as I was working directly with, I will not use the word hero now. After the comment we heard, I also was considering that this is not exactly the word to say, but maybe the narrators. So I mentioned when I was telling and my part that some of them were willing to change information. Like first they were sending one pictures and then getting comments of their relatives that it's not very suitable. They were asking to change it. So it's a process, and before publishing information, it's very important to one more time show it to the narrator and ask their opinion, because it is their story. And for me it was very important not to create my own narration and my point of view, what I heard and so on, but to check it not even twice, many times before I will give it to the publishing, and to understand that this story will be exactly the story they want to see later and that they tried to tell me. I'm not forgot to understand people from the first side, and I'm not reading their minds, and I can make mistakes. And each person collecting information, I think is a human being. So be careful and be open to the narrators. Let them be the narrators.
Two sentences, if I may. These tools can be very powerful in changing narratives, debates, people's lives. But I would compare it more to the river rather than a lake. You need to be prepared to be taken to the place you probably never even thought it existed. And I really liked the very morning presentation by Elena from the La Tempesta company from Barcelona, who was, among other companies, responsible for developing the tools, that we need to look at them as these humanities technologies. So technologies that are supposed to be assisting social processes, open-ended kind of repositories. Not a static picture.
Absolutely. Yes, Ella.
And maybe in addition to this idea also of security and open access, one of the dangers, really, it seems to be one of the perils of opening digital tool for the public, of course, is the issue of like what type of content will stream into this digital tools. What will feed this digital tools? What types of presentations? Whose agendas? So somehow again and again we come to the idea that this tool have to be curated by someone. So somehow we have this issue of security, not only more like kind of presenting something in public space that can be sensitive and traumatic and maybe not that acceptable, but this is another issue, the issue of that these tools may be very quickly fed by very kind of one-sided type of material, very kind of uniformous or homogenized type of presentations that somehow deal with this idea of how is it called in academic literature, melodramatic memorialization, when people really kind of intuitively know that this will work, kind of if I throw this kind of story, it will work, and step by step these digital tools will be fed by this type of story, and they will be populated by this, and that's it. So somehow the issue is again having in mind these ideas of fusion and the ideas of kind of hybridity, that some selections will go, but someone also needs to kind of probably clean something away, because as we know, heritage is not only very inclusive concept, it's also exclusive. Not all heritage is your heritage, and kind of heritage is not very kind of, it's not a kind of bubble that embraces everything. Something has to be selected away. So the issue is who will do it, on what premises, how often, like who will take care of this digital tools, kind of conceptually, really, whose agendas, whose practices, whose really ideologies.
Who do we give voice to some extent?
Or voices, a kind of who will be arbiter somehow. Not only a provider of mainstream discourse or mainstream ideological underpinnings for these conversations of these stories, but really who will be kind of judge or arbiter, like, okay, you have told your story, now kind of we invite something different, of different kind, and not only all the time, as has been said, something homogeneous, something like of the same type.
Very important point. I really think so. And we can get back to it. But let's hear from Elena online.
Thank you. Yes, just a very quick remark to underline absolutely what Kasia said, because this morning was, in my opinion, very well illustrated the concept of co-creation. And so in terms of co-creation, within the field of the tools, we have to have in mind the issue of agency. So what Kasia said is extremely important, because the risk is always to have a kind of hierarchical perception on this kind of work. And while our duty in some way is to create time and space for this agency to express. It's not even probably a matter of empowerment because they already have power, they already have voices, and so they are not waiting for us to give them the voice. But probably what is lacking is some kind of space outside, as Eleonora was saying, the mainstream flow of information. So, and also was really well represented by Elena Yedou this morning, while putting the technology at service. So it's not the technology per se, but it's at service of people who want to express. So thank you, Kasia, for underlining that.
And Magda, do you want to complement or anything? Because you also have worked with like direct content responsibles, and maybe you can share another aspect of this.
Well, in the same line, mainly, I think that it was not. It was a wider problem, a pandemic, but we surely needed much more physical contacts between us and the communities of refugees. And I really believe in the Greek case, for example, that we needed more physical contacts between the refugee communities also. So yes, I totally agree with Elena, with Kasia, that our job in reality is to create safe spaces in order to hear, and we have to learn to listen, no? And not to drive or try to impose our ideas, including from a scientific point of view. I'm not talking only about the logical positions, no?
Yeah.
So we have to be good listeners, first of all.
Excellent point. I myself would also like to add to something that Eleonora suggested, which is this idea of authenticity. So in a sense, we're looking, and that's the skill interviewer package, so to say, to extract not that which is perhaps anticipated by respondents as the desirable answer, because that's how they've been adapted or adapting to a specific environment. This is what people want to hear, and they deliver that, which is sometimes a story of hardship or a story of success. You know, like I had it really difficult, but now I made it, and I'm here, and I stand. It's not because this is not true, but there needs to be, I think, and one of the I think positive aspects that is very clearly evident for anyone who will take care to visit our results is this idea of authenticity, that we don't necessarily curate the successes or the perils. They are included there, and there's not this melodramatic, I really like that, this melodramatic recipe from victim to hero narrative, which is kind of a mythological archetype, yeah? From rags to riches, I had everything, I lost it, and here I am back again. Is this kind of flawed life story filled with both positives and negatives, which is the real meat and potatoes of life. And again, this is, I think, a very interesting challenge also for our future users, in which way the curatorial selection is working in such a fine way so as to preserve the authenticity of the original input while making it perhaps more concise, more accessible, because that's also why we have this, more accessible to a generation Z or Alpha, whatever, I didn't even know that existed, generation Alpha or other generations down the long line who may not understand the older generations' way of talking, or very slow narrative pace and so on, right? So I think this is where the curatorial experience, talent, and maybe some guidelines, which we also try to provide in our various manuals and how-tos and so on, will be useful, like how to deal with this fine balance, authenticity, but also curatorial, light-handed editing, who to invite and how to maybe pick the authentic elements, but only the essentials, because you cannot have a life in 20 slides. Or what is the maximum? I think this is 20, right? 20 different stops on the story map and so on. It's also like we cannot say that, right? Life is so much more complex. So the curator and the narrator, to use your word, have to be in a trustworthy, trusting relationship, where authenticity is preserved, but also some curatorial selection and judgment based on experience and on the art of curating intervenes. Or again, this is where there can be different approaches. I know that in Montesole there was a reluctance to intervene curatorially almost at all, or I don't know if I'm right or wrong, Elena, whereas maybe in your case you were able to select more specifically from all the richness of one human's experience or several humans' experience, that which could mirror the possibilities of the tools and the circumstances. Yeah? So that was the light curatorial hand involved.
By the way, I wanted to add that, in my opinion, what Magda told us about what is raised up in people who lived through forced migration is self-organization. And that's why maybe not always we will need to pick up a judge. And because this tool is also a part of art, and art is developing by itself because of this seek for some new shape. And first we are expressing the meaning in some kind of symbols, like first symbols that are coming to our mind, like these romantic stories and heartbreaking stories. But then next narrator will think, I cannot tell the same story because no one will listen to me. And that's the moment when narrator and refugee or forced migrant is becoming an artist, and from own curiosity is looking for a new shape. And that's how, for example, the idea of mixed recipes appeared, and it is something new, something interesting. I really have a positive opinion that new creators, they will keep it in mind. And if they need to tell their story in old way, let it be. It's also an advantage of digital tool. It cannot be overloaded because it's like a free space for everyone. But at the same time, each artist, narrator will have in mind that if you want to be heard, you may look for something interesting to bring and to add to this heritage real value.
Yeah, I really like this point, like taking something interesting and something really contributing to the public discussion. And I think, commenting on the situation with heritage that is created or forged in front of us. This the heritage of migration from Ukraine, let us say like that, not heritage of the war that far, but somehow this issue of forced migration from Ukraine, probably in bigger perspective. I think that, especially in Polish context, as Willa Decjusza worked with these narratives, it's really obvious that, what is being created probably is not something that corresponds to expectations of broader public in many cases, because in Poland, being a Ukrainian, it's a special status. Because of many reasons. Because Poles used to be victims of Ukrainians once upon a time in Volhynia in 1943. So somehow there still exists this historical narratives about Poles being victims in Ukrainians' hands during the war. And somehow this, of course, saturated also historical dialogue for quite many years and even decades. But somehow now the situation turned radically, and somehow, it's a fantastic thing that in Poland Ukrainians are perceived really as deserving, as someone who contributes to the society in a positive way. But at the same time, what is also what has to be taken on to the table is not only kind of positive issues, positive emotions and helping and rescuing, but also the issue of kind of negativity that also comes with this whole situation of war, the whole situation of forced migration, because people coming to Europe are of course they are not only traumatized, okay, let put it aside, they have rage, kind of, they are enraged, kind of, they are angry extremely, and somehow this idea of being angry and enraged is somehow maybe translated into the issue like they hate someone, they hate Russians, they hate everyone around. No, it's not like that. So somehow this issue of like this emotion that is very legitimate, emotion of rage, is in the same way this emotion of shame and emotions of kind of like feeling of being guilty somehow. It has to be translated also into heritage constructions, into heritage discourse. Heritage is not only about something very kind, so to speak. It's not something about very acceptable. Heritage is about many things, so somehow, but it has to channel many different emotions somehow that come with the issue of forced migrations. And it seems to me that really, and also coming back to 2015, we were so much prepared to accept the image of migrant as a poor creature who is absolutely impoverished, kind of poor and kind of savage, kind of just without anything, just without in rags. But these people really did not come without anything. They came without their own experiences. They have own historical narratives. They have their traditions. They have their very, very, very long histories and stuff like that. So somehow, and we missed that on that level, on that time as well. Somehow we wanted to have the image of migrant as a kind of stereotypical migrant. We will help him or her, like kind of this pitiful image. But now kind of we need to probably even with help of these digital tools to review this idea of really migrant, what migrant is about, what forced migrant is about. Is it a pitiful figure, or is it a hero, or is it something else, or is it a perpetrator as well, or is it a victim, or is it a sufferer? Or such a multiplicity, such an array of human experiences being forced migrants. So somehow we should really have an eye on this idea, like open for much, maybe if not for anything and everything, but be open for many experience, really, not kind of streamlining them, and again, not to allow just representatives of communities to talk. And also one of our big staple stones. We when we work with migrants and kind of representatives of migrants, we usually work with some speakers for their cause. And these people sometimes, they are not that, so to speak, representative. They have their own agendas, and so somehow who are they? Are those representatives of communities, for example? Whose heritage do they translate? So there's also a big issue for us.
Yeah, Dominika.
Mm-hmm. I have two things. I believe that the toolbox delivered by the project is actually almost an ideal set of shells, empty shells, to be filled in with various narration, and not necessarily narrations that has to be compared. Because the whole concept behind the project is more of a kind of constructive paradigm where each and every narrative is equal in a sense that has an equal right to be said and to be heard. And in that regard, it gives a chance to see the individual but collective experiences to be seen from various sides. And I have a story to be told, because we are circulating around storytelling. And I came across this situation, this story just recently, when we were almost about to finish the testing the tools of the So-Close project. You're aware that, I mean, almost each and every European society sometime had experienced the forced migration for various reasons. And Poles, of course, are probably front runners because of the numbers and the occasions and the difficult past being a bloodlands in between. But what I'm about to say is a very particular story of a very particular family living at the border near Ukraine and Slovakia, a Polish family. In early 20th century, 1903, there was a huge wave of immigration from that very poor areas to the US. And this particular family has in their past record the situation when 11 out of 12 siblings, exactly 11 brothers, left with one ship through Liverpool to Chicago. And they made their way through. They were all successful, and they were helping the family by sending every month $1 in an envelope, which was a fortune back in time for this who has been staying in Poland. And from the point of view of this family and the whole community, because it's such a powerful story, everybody knows it, these poor immigrants from remote areas of Poland were heroes until the day they are. And when the war started, when the war in Ukraine escalated, this particular family did everything and was successful in preparing and creating 11 flats, 11 rooms for the people from Ukraine who had to leave and who were searching for the place to stay. And the first story that the Polish hosts were sharing was that, we survived as a family, as a community, because of this 11 guys who has left. And you don't need to thank us, because it's simply a kind of paying back.
Pay it forward.
Exactly. So please keep going, because we're sure that it's going to be a successful story. So I hope it's going to be such a story, and I think it tells a lot about the rationale behind this project, because the empathy and sympathy lies not very deep underneath the surface. We just need to scratch it a bit.
Very interesting. I think we're almost at the end of this very exciting panel discussion. So before we wrap up, I have a quick round for each of you. Like the same question that each of you can respond. And the question is, what would you say are the best, like one of them, and also the most challenging aspects of working with digital tools in the context of cultural heritage of forced migration? So what was, in your experience or thinking about it, what would you say to others who are likely to use the tools in the future that was the best thing, and again, the most difficult thing that you experienced or considered, or it appeared to you while doing this work? And we can start with you, Kasia.
Well, let me start from the negative side and to end with something happened. So the biggest obstacle that I met is absolutely the same as for non-digital world. It takes your time and it takes your effort. So you need to think, what are you doing? Why? Like, for what reason? What exactly you will put on this map? how to make it transparent, and for example, what exactly you want to say when you're in this mixture of different feelings, as Eleonora mentioned, like the rage or the anger. Is this the story you want to share, and are you one-faced? Do you have only one side of the story? Or I think that each person is a kind of Hamlet, not one and not two-sided. We have the complicity of human experience, and when you are taking it into account, well, how to show this complicity and how to use art for the connection, for bringing exactly peace and possibility to understand each other better, not opposite. And what is the best part, that it was really bringing new connections and cooperation and co-creation, and that was inspiring, and that is a miracle. It not was a miracle, it still is a miracle for me. I met so many wonderful people, and I got to understand them a little bit better, and I also met people from the cultures maybe I have had my stereotypes about, or I was worried how it will be cooperating with Ukrainians when I am Belarusian right now, or I had some strange ideas how the Afghanian culture might look like. And yes, I was surprised, like a person coming from the jungle myself, that in Kabul girls were riding bicycles and climbing mountains. It was something new for me, and I'm not ashamed to accept that I didn't know everything. And it bring me a lot of new experience, beautiful experience, and also empowered the idea that human beings are not so divided by culture. They are different and individual, but still we have some common points and the ability to understand each other.
Thank you very much. Eleonora?
Yes, talking about the best facet or the best side of digital tools, aesthetics, I think. I would really emphasize this aspect. The tools are aesthetically appealing, at least from my point of view, and this is something that I think other cultural institutions, other actors working with cultural heritage will find out also that these tools kind of contribute to this aesthetical dimension. Whether it's not possible to do the same thing functionally in non-digital format, it's another thing. I think it's possible to kind of do many things without digital tools, but somehow, well, it may be a good addition really to have this aesthetical dimension. But what is on the negative side of the of the balance sheet? I think the idea of kind of communication via or kind of projection of many things via screen, it's something that distracts you from what's around you. It's the same thing like as with children who look in the screen, they do not see what's going on around. Also a story or anecdote from the field, Montesole. Helena, do you hear me? I will tell what I have seen during open day at Montesole. When our project team were doing their part of job, which means presenting these digital tools for the audience, for those people who came for the open day. And among these people, of course, there were migrants, there were locals, there were, well, very kind of hodgepodge public. But at the same time, what was interesting, just aside from all these activities, there were kind of street vendors selling T-shirts, 2 black people from Cameroon, a pair. And they were selling T-shirts, and I came to them kind of, what are you doing there? What are you selling? Because this is Montesole is a special place, and especially during that open day, that was a day of national liberation. It was like, why are these people there? They were selling T-shirts with symbolics of local partisan. It was like Il Lupo. So somehow it just struck me that people from other side of the hemisphere. They came to this place, they knew something about this place, maybe not in that manner that curators would like them to know, because they came with the idea that they, yes, we are here, we are selling t-shirt with partisan symbolics, and it works. So I was thinking, yes, why not? People are finding their ways of connecting to these narratives or to these stories. And they are sometimes very, very intricate and very unpredictable. So maybe for us who think about kind of digital solutions that are already there, we should not forget that in the kind of real world, in reality, people will do other things with the digital tools, and they will probably find some other ways of playing with them, working with them.
We don't control them fully.
Exactly. So somehow we should be open, really.
Thank you very much. Dominika?
As for the advantages, I think that it's worth to say that if you are a person interested in using the tools, you can be sure that they are ready to go. They have been carefully designed, they have been tested, they have been described, explained. It's not only virtual platforms, these are manuals, instructions, still consortium people behind to be asked and whom will be eager to answer your questions. So a lot of work has already been done. You to try to make a good use out of those platforms. The maybe not a disadvantage, but a challenge is that at the end of the day, you are still responsible for the content or more for the people who decide to share their stories and their experiences. And I think it's important not to forget.
Thank you very much. I think this will be the final word for our session today. I want to thank very much the panel participants. I want to thank the digital participants and in particular Elena Monicelli. I want to thank the physical participants in the room. I want to thank Lily Notrot, who has organized this event very, very smoothly, and to our technical support who made all the digital and physical and visual interactions possible. So a great hand of applause to everyone. And thank you very much. We are available via digital tools for interaction in the future. So have a good evening. Bye-bye.